Today I'm going to tell you why your Fujifilm camera is actually two devices in one. And yes, I'm holding a pink microphone. We'll get into that too. Hi everyone and welcome to Pal to Tech. If you're wondering about the green background, it's St. Patrick's Day. Today we are talking about the incredible versatility of digital cameras and the two different roles they play with your digital photos. As an example, let's talk about the Fujifilm X-T5. First off, it is a camera and it allows you to shoot and save JPEG and RAW files to the SD card. You control the exposure and the parameters of your shot using the dials on the camera and the camera menus as well. Pretty basic stuff so far. However, it is also a second device, and that is a post-production processor and editor. Very similar to photo editors like Lightroom and Capture One, meaning that you can jump into the Fujifilm camera menu and by way of adjusting some settings, you can perform similar tasks as you would do in editing software. For example, I can go into image quality settings and adjust my sharpness right here. While if I'm in Capture One, I can use the sliders right here in the sharpening section to do the same thing. While back on the Fujifilm camera, I can adjust the sliders right here in the tone curve section, which gives me the option to both adjust the highlights and the shadows of the scene using the controls in the camera. While if I'm over in Lightroom, I can drag and manipulate these sliders right here for the highlights and the shadows. These settings that are on your Fujifilm camera are obviously very different than exposure settings, meaning that if you add more brightness to your image by using the camera's highlight setting, that is not the same thing as, say, lowering down your shutter speed or opening up your aperture to increase your exposure. And that is because the exposure triangle settings, such as ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, they all affect your photo before you even finish pressing down the shutter release button. The camera handles those settings before it processes and sends out the image to the analog to digital converter on its way to the SD card. So instead, these settings right here, for example, color chrome FX blue, or perhaps sharpness, or even film simulation, those are all applied and they're baked right into your JPEG file. Let me say that again because it's relatively important, okay? Test. If you are shooting JPEGs, they are baked into... If you are shooting JPEGs and not RAW files. Okay, this bit's not going anywhere. This microphone was a gift given to my wife, who actually has a lot of real talent, unlike me sitting up here with this mic. She won it in a costume contest at the recent Atlanta Comic-Con. They gave her this mic, which somehow found its way down into this studio. I was just trying to make a point because I got tired of using this one, so I thought, you know, the mic... because I thought the mic would be better. Anyhow, no matter what toy I use, the important thing for you to understand is that if you're shooting JPEG files, all of these settings are baked right into the image. However, if you are shooting and saving out RAW files, instead of baking them into the image, what your camera does instead is it puts them in the metadata of the RAW file. Think of metadata as that little toy that's inside the Cracker Jack box. It's additional package of something inside the main package. The main package meaning your photo. Inside the photo, there's a little sub-container that contains all kinds of information about the photo and the conditions in which you shot it. And this is so important and so necessary to have, because if you shoot an image, let's do that right now. I'm going to shoot this with the film simulation of Velvia. Okay, now to be clear, I was only shooting in RAW. Let's take the SD card right out of the camera and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, here's the image right here. And I will just drag and drop it right into a photo editor. And now that I've successfully imported it, check out these settings. Have a look at this right here. Lightroom already read the metadata and chose the correct film sim that I shot at the time just a few seconds ago when I took the photo. Same thing with Capture One. I'll go ahead and import that photo right into Capture One. Now in Capture One, the film simulations are located under the curve dropdown in the base characteristics section of the menu. The ICC profile obviously is Fujifilm X-T5. Now the curve says auto, meaning that it's going to use whatever the metadata says at the time you took the photo. Remember, we shot this in Velvia. However, I can change this obviously to Acros, and Capture One will immediately apply its version of the Fujifilm film simulation of Acros. Now notice I've got Velvia here as well. So I have it in two places. I've got Velvia as a menu item, and I've got auto, meaning read whatever the metadata is in the file. And both of those should be identical. If I switch to Velvia, there it is in Velvia, and here it is in auto. And as you can see, they are absolutely identical. So obviously metadata, and in particular the metadata of the settings that you're changing in the camera's menu, are extremely important when you go to edit in external software. Because if you're using the camera as its own editor, and remember, that's the second thing that a camera can do other than take pictures, it can also allow you to edit things like sharpness and clarity and all of that. And what's interesting, and this was originally going to be the sole subject of this video, what about some of the very subtle changes that are very Fujifilm specific? Are those changes being picked up when it comes from setting them here versus pulling up the raw file and seeing them in the photo editing software? And to demonstrate that, let's do white balance. If you go into the white balance area of the menu, you've got your top 3 automatic choices that the camera will decide. You've got 3 custom containers that you can make whatever you want. And one of the settings that you can customize is color temperature in terms of Kelvin. I'm going to take 2 photos now, and I'm going to show you something very interesting. Right now, you're looking at the camera's automatic white balance setting. However, I'm going to go into the white balance setting, into the color temperature. We're going to do that. And I'm going to just choose something way off here. There we go. Really blue. You see that? I've just set it to 2500 Kelvin. Obviously, way off, wrong, and it now has a blue tint. And it's a firm 2500 Kelvin. You see it right there in the menu. I'm going to go ahead and take that shot. Next, I'm going to go back into the color balance area, back into the Kelvin, and I'm going to keep it at 2500, okay? I click on OK. Now we get what's called white balance shift. And this menu right here pretty much comes up whenever you are editing one of these white balance parameters. And what I'm going to do for white balance shift is I'm going to just shift everything to really bright pink. You see that? All the way up in the upper right quadrant. I'll set it as that. And so even though I've set my camera at a 2500 Kelvin hard, firm temperature color value setting, right? I have white balance shifted it after I did that. Now, we already know that if I shoot a JPEG and I take a JPEG out of here, it will exactly match. However, does something like white balance shift, not just white balance firm settings like Kelvin, but white balance shift settings, do those get carried into the metadata and ultimately make their way into your photo editing software? Let's find out. I'm going to go ahead and take the shot. Okay, that should do it. Let's now take a look at what we got with the raw file. Okay, importing my images now into Capture One and bringing them into Lightroom as well. Okay, so here they are in Lightroom, side by side, both images that I took. Remember that the first image was shot with a fixed value of 2500 Kelvin. If I click on it to open it up, have a look at this right here in the color temperature area, 2350 Kelvin. A little bit different than the 2500 Kelvin that I had put, I guess, in the metadata. Let's look at Capture One now. Same thing here, Capture One, what I assume is 2070 Kelvin. So yeah, you've got 2 different editing programs showing you 2 different light temperature amounts, both of which are different than what you had set the camera for. But what about that color shifting that I did? Did that carry through? Let's see. Here we are in Capture One. This was the image where I moved the little dot in the white balance shift all the way up to the upper right magenta area. And yeah, it came through pretty well. Looking at Lightroom now, here's that image, and you can definitely see more magenta was applied. Neither one of these software editing apps are showing, numerically at least, the correct values for what I had originally set in the camera. But does that really matter? I mean, if you look at them side by side, they look pretty similar in both Capture One and Lightroom with regard to color temperature. I have not made any adjustments to these raw files. You're looking at them exactly as I took them straight off the camera. And the important thing to keep in mind is that all of this is open to interpretation. We saw that I clearly set my white balance to 2500 Kelvin. Once that amount was written to the metadata and then saved to the SD card and then brought into the computer, it was up to the photo editing software like Capture One and Lightroom to then read that metadata and make its best interpretation. You know, it's interesting. It's almost as if your camera and the way post-production works is like an elaborate game of telephone, right? You whisper into one person's ear a sentence or a phrase, and it goes around the room, and then the last person, right, speaks it, and it's complete gibberish. And I'm not saying it's gibberish by a long shot. What I am saying is that there is definitely steps along the way where the software steps in and does its best to figure out what you did originally with the camera. And yes, while that's stored in metadata, what I think today we've learned is that even though it could be stored in metadata in a firm fixed value of, say, 2500 Kelvin, even then it still gets interpreted at the end of the line with the software. And really, when it comes right down to it, don't let yourself be held hostage by these sliders or by these exact numbers. Instead, use your eye, use your perception, and use your best judgment as to what looks right for you and the vision and what you want to accomplish. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found the video helpful or at least entertaining. And if you did, be sure to give it the like and subscribe. Have a wonderful, happy St. Patrick's Day for those of you that celebrate it. I am going to be signing off now, but have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you in a new video next week. Take care.